Well, it's 7:30, and I think it'd probably be appropriate to, first of all, make a decision. I appreciate all of you coming out. Obviously, with what has transpired earlier in the evening, we're not going to get the turnout that we had hoped for. Speaking to the other people on the committee, we're more than happy to take the time and go through the whole presentation that we intended to go through if you want us to. We have another public meeting scheduled for the 30th of January. Whether the situation in the Middle East will be substantially improved or even any different by then, no one can, I think, predict. Again, if you're willing to sit and listen to us, we're willing to sit and talk at you about this project. We've been working on it for several months, so it's basically up to you. How would you prefer to handle it? Go ahead. Okay. Dan Kemmis, the mayor, had intended to introduce the meeting this evening. He had to be in Helena. He asked me to do it. My name is Bill Baldus, and I'm the chairman of Missoula Baseball Advocates. This particular group has been together since May of 1990. We were called together through a solicitation by the mayor's office, people who had expressed an interest in bringing Major League Baseball back to Missoula. As a result of our organizational meeting, we broke ourselves into 3 committees. These committees were identified, and the duties were outlined in the letter that you received giving notice of this meeting. Purpose of the meeting tonight is several-fold. One is to describe the process that the committee has been going through during our meetings. We would also like to explain the conclusions that we've reached up to this point, which are interim and not final by any means. Also try to explain what we have yet to do, and then we want to make sure that we have been using all of the interested people that are out there, and I'm not sure that we have. We do not intend for this to be a closed process. Those people that have been involved are involved because they had an interest and they had the time. They don't necessarily have any greater expertise than any of you. So if any of you are interested in getting involved in the process, please let either me know or any of the committee members know. John Harvilla, who just walked in the striped shirt there, is an intern for the city, and he's been working with us very, very closely. If you are interested in participating generally, please contact him at the end of the meeting, and he can take your name and phone number. If you're interested in working with any of the specific committees, please contact the person that addresses this group on the specific committee assignments. The way we thought we'd handle it very briefly is get the committee chairman to give a very short presentation. Then when all of us have spoken to you, then we can open it up to questions and hopefully answers and comments from you. So to begin with, I think I'd like to introduce Ike Leegland, the local architect, is the chairman of the site selection committee. We've been working in that process from the very beginning, and I think I can explain that further to you.
We originally approached this thing, as Bill said, very openly. What we did was determine what we felt was needed in terms of area for a baseball site, for a park. Everybody went out and looked around, talked to realtors, talked to friends, what properties were possibly available that could be considered for the site. We ended up with about 13 or 14. After some more investigation, they eliminated themselves down to 8 sites. 5 of those sites are shown here. We also considered one at Fort Missoula, and one near the mall, and one at the corner of Mullen and Reserve Street. For these those 3 sites became eliminated later after economic conditions were considered or other factors came to play. We ended up with these 5 sites. We then established a site rating matrix. We determined what we felt was most important in a baseball park, and I'll just tell you what those were. First one was the ability to accommodate a baseball park. Second, ease of acquisition. Third, environment. Fourth, ease of development. Fifth, adequacy of street network. 6, the ability to attract the greatest attendance. 7, access to non-automobile transportation. 8, availability of support facilities. 9, access to regional highways. 10, positive community impacts. 11, compliance with urban comprehensive plan. 12, potential to use existing facilities. And 13, potential for expansion. We then weighted these criteria on the best we could, and what we felt was the most important item, of course, number 1 being ability to accommodate a ballpark. We all individually visited the sites. We came up with our own personal interpretation of what we felt these sites should be evaluated at, and then we combined our efforts, and there was 6 of us that went and looked at all the sites, and we put these together, averaged our findings, and came up with 5 sites, these last 5 sites here, and evaluated them in terms of which was the most appropriate site, or seemed to be the most appropriate site to use based on those criteria. At this time, we are just staying at that level. There are some negotiations going on regarding the availability of sites, costs involved, should we get involved with one, other considerations that may come into play, and at this time we're just waiting to hear on, particularly the Champion site is one, if it truly will become available for this purpose, and then we're going to continue with the process as soon as the rest of the information arrives. But any other sites could be considered at any time should a good one pop up. Okay.
If any of you have any thoughts as to another alternative site, as Ike indicated, we've not eliminated anything, simply because these are the ones that we have come down to out of the larger list. Doesn't mean that there may be another one or may not be another one out there that's more appropriate yet. Additionally, if anyone believes that there is a criteria that we should have been considering and perhaps didn't, we'd like to know that too. Again, this is really our first opportunity to get the public at large involved. The second committee that was established was the Finance Committee. That committee was charged with the duty of attempting to determine what financing alternatives were available for us to build a ballpark, and then structure those, or structure them in order as to what would perhaps be the most appropriate and the most available. The chairman of that committee is Carl England, and I think he's in a position to describe that committee's activities.
What we had to do in terms of money is answer 3 questions. Money for what, how much money, and how to get the money. The money for what, the answer to that is that we do not have in Missoula a ballpark that meets the requirements of the Pioneer League. So we know we need to construct or improve an existing facility. We also know that we do not have a franchise yet, and that the franchise itself may cost some money. What we talked about and what we agreed to on that was that the franchise is a much less expensive item than building a ballpark or improving an existing ballpark. And what we also know is that at least in 2 of the Pioneer League cities in Montana, the franchise itself is community owned. And it's owned by individual stockholders in the community. And we decided that that would be a viable way to finance a franchise if one became available for sale at a reasonable price. And secondly, that that there is significant interest by people who do own franchises to come to Missoula as the owner of a franchise if we had a new park, that probably getting the franchise from a money standpoint was a heck of a lot easier than the money standpoint of building a ballpark. So we put aside how we got the money to build a franchise for now and concentrated instead on how much money we needed to build a ballpark. We also, so when we started talking about building a ballpark, we had to bracket the possibilities about what it would cost. And by that I mean that we cannot, until we know the site, know exactly what it is that we're going to build. And until we know exactly what we're going to build, we don't know what the costs are going to be. But yet you have to have some idea about cost in order to begin to formulate some ideas on possibilities of raising that money. So that if a ballpark costs $100, well, then your fundraising activities are one thing. If a ballpark costs $100 million, then your fundraising activities are another. And so we started, first thing we had to do was figure out, well, what kind of money are we talking about to build a ballpark? And we settled on the bracketed amount of $1 to $3 million. And the reason we settled on that was because that's about where we guessed it would be. And we guessed that after talking with the commissioner of the Pioneer League that we were looking at about a 3,000 to 4,000 seat park. We had data from other places that have built parks in the recent past estimating that the costs are in a range of from several $100s to $1,500 per seat. And so we figured if we're looking at a 3,000 to 4,000 seat park and our costs are approximately $1,000 a seat, then we're looking at somewhere in the neighborhood of $1 to $3 million. I want to repeat something. This isn't even an estimate. It's a bracket. It's not a hard number. It's just something we had to use in order to start the process of planning. Well, how do you get some amount of money to build a ballpark in Missoula? Then what we did was we tried to get the answer to the last question, which is how to get the money. And the first thing we did was we listed the possible sources of money by category. And basically there's public money, and that can come in the form of a grant from some sort of public agency or a debt, public debt. And the other is private money, and that can come in the source of a grant or debt. In other words, a gift or a loan. We had to also understand that there are limitations on all of those categories. There are legal limitations when you start talking about public debt and public financing. There are legal requirements you have to meet. And there are also some requirements that you have to meet in terms of location. In other words, we had to figure out whether or not, for example, if it was going to be a park that was paid for by city debt, did the park have to then be located in the city? Because we had, from the site selection committee, I think when we started, all 13 possible sites, and we had to match up possible funding sources for each possible site. We started with the idea of a public looking for money in the form of a public grant. And certainly you can get money from the federal government, but there doesn't seem to be any money available for these kinds of activities from the federal government these days. Billings did a major rehabilitation of their ballpark a few years ago with partially funded by federal dollars, but those dollars just don't seem to be available right now. There don't seem to be many state dollars available for these kinds of facilities. And so we're looking at federal grant local money. And the one source of funds for which there could possibly be local grant money is the Missoula Redevelopment Agency, which is the agency that has redeveloped downtown. That would require that either the park be built in the existing boundaries of the Missoula Redevelopment Agency, which is basically downtown, and we don't have a site downtown, or on some expansion of that existing boundary, and perhaps the Champion site would fit into an expansion of that existing boundary, or some sort of new district. And we didn't really identify where a new district could possibly be. So basically we've looked, MRA is a source of possible money, but it probably is only a source of possible money at the Champion site. Next, we looked at public debt, which is basically city-run debt. And we know that the city can sell general obligation bonds. It can go out, it can sell bonds, It can raise money that way, and it must pay back the bondholders. We know that the money that can be raised with those general obligation bonds can be used both within and outside the city, so they can be used on all 5 sites. But a general obligation bond requires a vote of the people of Missoula, the registered voters within the city limits, and it requires a certain minimum number of people voting in order to pass. And so if we were going to do a general obligation bond, we would need to plan that around an election at which you would get a minimum amount of turnout, so that if the people wanted to indebt the city to that amount and they voted for it, that it would be legally sufficient. We also looked at the idea of another form of city debt, which is revenue bonds. And that's a bond that the city sells, a debt that the city incurs, but there has to be a identified source to pay back the revenue bonds. In other words, we could sell a certain amount of bonds and pay it back with the revenue from the ball club. But you have to have a source sufficient enough to pay back those bonds. Revenue bonds do not require a vote. We decided, didn't we, Chuck, that it could be used for projects both within and outside the city?
I think so.
Yeah.
Critical thing is there that the city own the facility.
Right. The city would have to own the facility itself. And if we're talking about any sort of large amount of revenue bonds, the amount of income generated from a minor league franchise is just not going to be sufficient enough to pay it back. And so revenue bonds could possibly be used in some sort of mix of funding, but certainly in and of themselves they couldn't be used because we wouldn't have the kind of income to pay off the debt. We also talked just lately about another idea, and this was, again, we borrowed this from Billings, and that would be some sort of a citywide special improvement district, which would not require a vote of the people. It would require setting it up in and a vote of the city council. We believe we could use that money both within and outside the city, as long as the city owned the facility. And the idea really came about when we talked to the people that were involved in the winter sports program similar to this, where the mayor put together a bunch of people that were interested in winter sports. And one of their ideas was that perhaps what Missoula needed was a good ice skating rink. And they came and talked to us about, is there any possibility of combining facilities on an ice skating rink and a ballpark? And I think Ike told us that from a design standpoint, you could design the two together. You could have certain common facilities so that the bathrooms and things like that could be used by both. And in that situation, maybe it'd be best to create a special improvement district or something like that that would be payable by all property owners in the city to construct a sort of a complex, a sports complex that would include both a ballpark and an ice skating rink. Finally, we know that there is existing authority under state law for the city to sell something that's called citizen bonds, which are basically bonds that the city writes and the city sells in and of itself, right over the counter, right over here at City Hall, instead of going through D.A. Davidson or something like that. Sold to people in Missoula, sold in small denominations. And it's another form of raising money. Again, it would have to be paid back. You would have to identify how it was going to be paid back. And probably, again, if you talked about a mix of funding, citizen bonds may fall into that mix. But certainly I don't think we ever envisioned that it would be able to pay for the total amount of the ballpark. When we went into the private source of funding, we looked first at the idea of private debt, going to a bank and borrowing the money for a ballpark. We've had the same problem with that as we do with revenue bonds, and that is simply that we don't really have an income off of the park to be able to pay it back. In addition to that, if we were going to go that route, I think it would be cheaper for the city to issue its own bonds because it would get a lesser interest rate. So the idea of borrowing money from a bank, private borrowing, doesn't seem like a good idea. And then finally, we talked about raising money from private sources. And we talked about a fundraising campaign to raise money in small contributions, both as a method of raising part of the money you would need to build a ballpark, and also as a method of generating support in the community for baseball in Missoula. And we've talked to some people about using the existing Little League and the existing sports programs that exist to get the kids interested. That gets the parents interested, and you use it. You can raise some money that way, but you also use it as a way to generate interest. We talked about the possibility of large contributions from some of the larger corporate interests in Missoula. We identify those. We don't really have a way to make a pitch to them. I mean, we know, for example, that the Montana Power Company certainly has capability to give a large contribution, but we don't really know exactly how to approach them or what. But I mean, that is a possible source of money. On the Champion site, I believe we want to explore with Champion the idea of making a contribution in terms of donation, perhaps, of part or all of the land whereon that would be located. When we talked about raising money from private sources, we quite arbitrarily said, okay, let's say you could get, let's say you wanted to approach this from the standpoint of some mix of funding. In other words, you took some private fundraising, some public debt, and some public grants. Let's say we could possibly persuade MRA to give us a grant of $1 million, and then we raise revenue bonds or sell bonds that are worth $1 million. Then can we raise $1 million? And that was a question that we asked of people who have a lot more experience in doing this in Missoula certainly than I do. And what they told us is that it's difficult. That the capability in this town exists to raise a significant amount of money for something like a community project, like baseball, but that it was a difficult process, that it had to be planned well, and that what you probably needed to start things off was about 10% of the amount that you were going to raise in order to have the resources to be able to raise the money. And so and that's as far as we have gotten at this point. Again, I just want to close by saying that we're trying to keep all the options that we can open, looking at it down as many different avenues as we can, trying to figure out if there are any legal impediments. If there are any ways around them. If not, then we take them off the list for all of the sites. And then once the site selection is made, or maybe in conjunction with the site selection, we'll help with the site selection from the standpoint of, well, there's money available here but not here, and that kind of business. Then we can actually sit down, figure out exactly what it's going to cost us, and see how it is that we can raise that kind of money.
I was involved very heavily in the franchise acquisition end of this process. It became obvious to us that the franchise question broke itself down into three parts, probably more, but three was easy to deal with. The first was how to own a franchise, in what form. The second was the financial end of it, and the third was the source of the franchise. In terms of how to own the franchise, the three alternatives that became the most obvious were for the city itself to own the franchise. That was never given any serious consideration. The second alternative was, as Carl indicated, a franchise that was privately owned locally, probably through a publicly held corporation that in itself was owned and funded by the people in Missoula. That would have a tendency to do several things, not the least of which would be to increase and maintain public interest in the ballpark and in the team. You could quite possibly sell shares in the corporation of relatively low denominations You could give them to kids for their birthdays. I mean, a kid could say to himself, geez, I own a share of stock in that ball club. From PR purposes, it'd be a super way to go. As Carl indicated, Billings is publicly held by the people. Great Falls is publicly held by the people. From everything we've been able to determine, they are the two most successful franchises in the Pioneer League. And a lot of the reason for that is the nature of their ownership. The third means of owning a franchise would be to have it privately owned by somebody outside of Missoula, somebody not from Missoula. That's not unusual at all. Helena is owned by an individual from California. Pocatello is owned by an individual from California. And there are advantages and there are disadvantages to having someone not from Missoula. Obvious advantages doesn't cost you anything. Obvious disadvantage is that that person may or may not have the commitment to the community that we would like. If he's got the franchise to bring into Missoula, he's also got that same franchise to take out of Missoula if he chooses to. So that's a problem. The preference we came to was the second alternative, the publicly held by local individuals franchise. Now, whether or not that's going to be possible depends on some other things. It has been our understanding that if we are to acquire a new franchise, an expansion franchise, you're probably looking in the area of $250,000. If we are to acquire an existing franchise, the last one sold for in excess of $300,000, and that was sold to the individual that owns the Helena franchise. That was the last one sold, and he paid in excess of $300,000 for that franchise. Basically, it's whatever the market will bear. It's an asset like any other asset, and it sells for whatever someone's willing to pay for it. There is a substantial market for these things now. If you ask people in the baseball industry, the majority of them in minor leagues don't make money on the operation of their ball clubs. They make money when they sell the franchise. And there's a heck of a market for it right now. Now, as far as sources of the franchise go, there's basically three, one of which is kind of complicated and it requires a lot of dominoes falling into place. As you probably know, the National League is expanding by 2 teams. The short list has been announced. They, it's my understanding, intend to announce the final 2 selections sometime this spring, probably in April. One of the cities that made the short list is Denver. Denver presently has a AAA ball club. Here's the scenario as we have been led to believe. If Denver gets one of the 2 National League expansion franchises, quite likely Salt Lake, which has a Pioneer League franchise, will move up and either become a AA or AAA affiliate of Denver. That'll vacate that franchise and leave 1 slot of the 8 franchises open. I have been in contact with the owners of the Salt Lake franchise. They said that if this happens and this happens and this happens, they will move that Pioneer League franchise to Missoula. Super way to go if we can do it, but there's some things that have to happen. Is Denver likely to get it? Denver's a very strong candidate. I think that from what, again, I understand, there's a very strong move to put at least one of the new teams in the West for scheduling and divisional purposes. The other team may go to St. Pete, may go to Buffalo, nobody knows for sure, but they'd like to keep one of the teams out west. There's also an emphasis on keeping the minor league organization in the same geographical area as the major league organization, if they can, because it helps engender fan support and loyalty for the parent club. The second alternative for franchise acquisition would be if the league itself was to expand. There's 8 teams in the league right now. You can't expand by an odd number because it makes scheduling very, very difficult. So we'd have to expand by 2. We'd have to be Missoula and somebody else. Now, there has been some interest by some other people in putting ball clubs into western cities that could play in the Pioneer League. Casper, Wyoming wants a team. Another Wyoming city wants a team. There's another Canadian city in Alberta that wants a team. There's a couple of cities in Montana that want a team. I don't know if they're big enough to really sustain one, but that's a possibility. There has been no specific move made by the league itself to accommodate expansion. There's been a committee appointed, but Ralph Nellis, who's the commissioner, is pretty conservative. And he's real happy with the league as it is constituted right now and has not indicated any great desire to expand. The final option would be to bring in an existing franchise. That is, move one from a city where they now play into Missoula. I have got 2 owners that have told me that they would move a club here tomorrow if we had a place for them to play. And they would announce tomorrow that they were going to do that if we had a place for them to play. I have also been told by a number of people that we would be amazed at the interest in Missoula and in Missoula as a location for a minor league franchise if we had a ballpark, or if we could say, if we've committed, okay? If we say, this is the site we're gonna have, this is the ballpark we're gonna build, if you come here. From everything we've been able to determine, there will be a number of people who say, yeah, we will come if you will do that. Personally, I think that if we can make the decisions we have to make, and as a community make the commitment that we have to make financially, we can play ball in Missoula. Probably not the 92 season, but definitely the 93 season in a brand new ballpark. Now, one other set of comments I'd like to make. A couple of weeks ago, there was a news broadcast on one of the local TV stations in which the sports reporter was interviewing Ralph Nellis, who is the president of the Pioneer League. And Mr. Nellis expressed some concern about the future of the Pioneer League. And this was picked up on by the reporter, and it caused him a lot of concern, and it caused the guys on the committee a lot of concern. Basically, our concern was, well, hey, if we're not going to have a Pioneer League, then what in the hell are we doing here? You know, let's go home or go to work and try to make a living, because all of this is just so much drill. So I started talking to people that are in the Pioneer League, and the conclusion that I've come away with is the Pioneer League and its relationship to Major League Baseball has never been stronger. What they did was, over a period of months, negotiated this agreement, okay? They never had one before. They never had a formal written agreement between Major League Baseball and minor league baseball. Everything was done on a handshake, with a phone call, and nothing was formal. What Cincinnati did with Billings wasn't necessarily the same thing as what Milwaukee did with Helena. They had their own deals. Not anymore. Everything is the same. Everything is in writing. Exactly what is required of the minor league ball clubs is in here. What is required of the parent clubs is in here. What we have to build in a brand new ballpark is in here. It's now there's a formal agreement, and everybody seems to believe that that minor league baseball has never been in better shape, and has never been in better shape in connection with or in relationship to its relationship with Major League Baseball. So, I'm not exactly sure where Mr. Nellis was coming from, but everybody that I've talked to disagrees with him pretty clearly. We would like now to open it. If you have any questions or comments, I would ask that you step up to the podium and identify yourself. We are filming this for 2 reasons. One is we may very well show it on MCAT, so that people who could not attend can view it and take whatever benefit they can derive from our comments. Secondly, we're taping it so that we don't have to take as good of notes. We'll get you on tape, and your comments we can review them later and get back to you if we can't answer them specifically. So if anybody has any questions, I'd appreciate you could come up, identify yourself, and identify the specific person to whom your question is addressed, and we'll do our best to answer it.
My name is Brian DeSalvatore. Live in Missoula. As far as the siting, if you, would the city, or I guess the county, are all these in the city, are they not?
No,
I guess Miller Creek.
Miller
Okay.
Creek's not, and Lindbergh Craig is not.
Right. Would the residents, would the citizens be able to vote on the site, given a pro-con cost analysis, similar to like the election, the ballots, where you have a initiative description, a rebuttal, or would this be how would this be chosen? How would the winner come out?
Okay. Before this is what we had kind
I
of.
realize this might be premature, but I think that ultimately it's not.
Ultimately, we're going to have to face those.
Yeah.
We're going to have to make those decisions and answer those questions. At a very minimum, before any final site is selected, we have to do a community poll. We have to go to the people in the area and determine what they think about it, how they feel. Legally, there's no requirement, but politically, with a small p, you're crazy if you don't, because there's not a lot of sense in coming to a conclusion and in essence putting all of your eggs in that basket and then find that you're faced with a neighborhood organization that's just dead set against what you're trying to do. Now, with regard to the Lindbergh Craig site, that was already done once for the Legion program. Those folks went out and canvassed the appropriate people in the area. And it's my understanding that of all the people they contacted, they got one person that was even remotely negative. Now, that site is restricted to minor league baseball only right now with the contract that it has, what the Legion has with the county. But the county has said, no, fine, hey, you can put professional baseball, but we want you to do the canvas again and make sure that the people are not adverse to it. As far as a vote, the vote may be restricted to the funding options that we've talked about. Obviously, the people that would be most immediately affected would have an opportunity to vote at that point. I'm not aware of any plans that we have at the moment of having a vote publicly on any given site.
If Champion costs $3 million and Lindbergh costs $1 million, that would make a difference in the voting.
It would.
I'm just wondering how that is going to be dealt with. I might be.
If you go only on costs, the question's got to be not only how much does it cost, but where do you get the money? So, for example, Champion costs let's use those two as an example on a completely hypothetical situation. Champion costs $3, Lindbergh costs $1. Of the 3 in Champion's willing to donate 1, MRA is willing to donate 1, and public money is going to have to pay for 1, okay? Or public debt's going to have to pay for 1, let's say, of the 3. At Lindbergh Craig, it costs 1, but there's no donation except for what the Legion's already put into it, you know, and that kind of stuff. So you can't necessarily balance straight cost against cost. But I think your question really is, well, how do you make those decisions? And the answer is that up until now, any decision like that, and we haven't reached a decision of that magnitude, obviously, have been made by this group of people that have been working on the thing, where we get together, we say, well, what do we do now? And in terms of how do we make that the ultimate decision that you're talking about, I think what the mayor has told us is that decision has to be made in a very broad public forum.
And that's what this meeting was intended to begin.
To begin, that's correct. And that's what the next meeting is intended to expand upon. And obviously, if the city council was involved, the city council would have to hold hearings. And if the county commissioners involved, they would have to hold hearings. Whether or not then any one of those bodies, who would be the ones who would have to call for a vote, said, look, the best way to make this decision is through a vote, that hadn't been decided yet.
And to take that one step further, as Ike indicated, we started out with 13 sites, and the majority of them just kind of fell by the wayside because of things that were idiosyncratic to each given site. And one of the single largest detriments was cost. The majority of the sites that were disposed of because of the cost of the site itself, totally disregarding the improvements. Now, of all of these sites that continue, the Champion site we're not really sure about at this point in terms of cost. I have been told that the Miller Creek site is right at $700,000, which in all honesty is too damn expensive for what we have in mind. The Campbell Field site, because the university is involved, we can't get them to make a decision. Trying to get the university to make a decision is trying like to push a chain. I mean, theoretically it's possible, but ain't nobody ever seen it done. I'm frustrated with people. So, in all likelihood, if the Campbell site is in fact still available to us, I don't believe the university is just going to be able to say, "Here, guys, gee, congratulations, you got a site for a ballpark." I think they're all with the funding problems that the youth system's got generally. I think they've got to sell that, and I think it's going to be a pretty substantially expensive parcel. But I hope that at least partially answered that question.
Carl, did your 1 to 3 million bracket
Yes.
include the price of land, or is that just the construction of the park?
That's the construction of the park.
So we would
Now-
add another $500,000?
But we don't know.
I mean,
You don't know.
we'd add however much each of these cost.
Yes, you would add how much each of those costs to what ultimately could be the cost at that particular site, not knowing really what the final cost is going to be.
Dick Martin. I live down Florence. An old Legion baseball player back in the 60s, and my father was proud to say, one of the Babe Ruths of the semi-pro league that was in here in the 50s when Salmon, Idaho, and Hamilton, and Stevensville, and Florence, and Bonner, and Ronan, and Thompson Falls, and Mullen, Idaho, all had a good league. So yeah, it is possible. Two questions, really. I wondered, first off, if there was any research done into a multiple use type facility that would pass better. For instance, Sam Yehuziak has been a major push behind renovating the fairgrounds. I wondered if you had considered that. I think the community would stand behind a project that had multiple use over a single use thing. And the other point that I'd like to bring up is I wondered if you've really actively pursued through the press the chance of a major private donation like Denny Washington. For instance, it took, when you think, well, I'll tell you, the last 2 or 3 years, every time I go to a university football game, I feel like calling up Denny Washington and saying, boy, we needed that. We needed somebody to get the ball rolling. Can you imagine the crowd that sits at Washington Stadium now sitting out at Dornblaser Field? It's not even, you can't even envision it anymore. So the chance of a park being named for a private person, for instance, coordinated with the Fair Board desire to renovate, might be a real good possibility.
Now, we have, in connection with the site selection process, we did consider a site in the area of the fairgrounds. Ike, do you remember why we discounted that.
I think part of the concern was we were right near the other site at Playfair for one.
That's right, yeah.
Was a major concern, and it didn't seem sensible to consider two sites at the same location.
As far as the funding, yes, we definitely.
Don't you think a multiple use site would have immense more chance of passing any public vote than a single
Absolutely.
use?
Yeah, and that's why we're trying to coordinate our efforts with the winter sports group that has just begun its work. And it's entirely possible that we're gonna be able to do that, to do something with them to satisfy both our needs and their needs and the desires of the people that like to pursue winter activities and the desires of the people that like to pursue baseball. Unfortunately, they're about 6 months behind us in the process. Dick Goldsmith is the particular individual that I've been working with in connection with the ice skating rink idea. And when I contacted a couple of people who design sports complexes, they were really intrigued by that idea of like Ike said and Carl said, of putting something together where certain parts of the facilities can be used interchangeably. Obviously, you're not going to be able to put ice on the ball field, but you can use a parking lot, you can use a dressing room, you can use a concession areas, that kind of thing.
Well, I was even trying to envision whether Washington Stadium could be, but obviously it's too rectangular and couldn't be really converted. But you know, I mean, there's
Won't work for a baseball park.
no. But I was just curious with that thought in mind, if there. I think you'd be surprised. We've been small little ranchers in the area, but and just struggle to make a living. But I think you'd be surprised how many wealthy people there are in the area that might say with a stadium that was honored in the name of that person, for instance.
That's something now, maybe you can help or somebody else can help us. One of the problems that we had is do we attempt to generate financial support and financial commitments first, or do we narrow things down and perhaps pick a site or two sites and get some plans on the drawing board, however informal, so that somebody can see exactly what they're buying into? And I think, right, wrong, or otherwise, that's the route we chose to take, to try to narrow it down a little bit, get some architectural renderings, some schematics, whatever, and then go to people like you're talking about and see if we can perhaps find either Denny Washington or another Denny Washington or a group of Denny Washingtons,
Absolutely.
to kick the bucks in. You bet. And
You
I
say
think-
if we do have a ballpark, a existing franchise would move here immediately?
Absolutely. That's what I've been told. Matter of fact, I had two owners that wanted to be here tonight.
I think you could find a ballpark with a man that would, or a group of people that would, be so honored. And I wondered if there was any research done into, is there any tax breaks given for those sort of donations?
We know a lot of that stuff. In other words, if they give money to the city, we're a charitable organization. And and I think Bill's put it real well, but I think what you have to understand is that we're not far enough along in the process to be able to go to anyone and say, well, we're thinking about building a ballpark, we're thinking about putting it here, and we need this much money in order to do it. And your ideas are all wonderful, and we have talked about them, and that's one of the reasons tonight is to see if anybody knows anything about something other than an ice skating rink. Does anybody else know of anybody else that's looking for facilities that we can combine and that kind of thing?
Could I ask who the primary initiator of this was? Was it the mayor?
It was the mayor.
I read that, and I was proud to hear him. I must have a fond memory from the past, but all it takes is somebody like that has some power that can get the ball rolling. So, thank you.
You bet.
I'm going to, for the first time in my life, maybe ask to be on a committee there with Carl, but not you, Carl, it's the committee part.
I'm a nasty chairman, right?
That is, these two owners who are so eager to come here. if we build it, they will come. They are number 3, the private outside Missoula franchises.
Yep.
We will pay them $300,000 to come here.
No.
Okay.
They own it, they just bring it here. We don't
They
pay
bring
them
it-
anything.
Fine, and all they get is their profit or whatever their reason they're in it.
They enter into a lease with us for the
Okay.
facility, and in that lease, we would hopefully, it would be long-term. In my totally informal discussions with these people, I tried to tell them, this is not our preferred way of doing this. So please understand that, you're not number 1 on our list. Number 1 on our list is getting a franchise of our very own. And please also understand that the only way that I could recommend to the group and to the city that we do this with a private owner is if we could get a long-term lease arrangement and we get a right of first refusal. So that if you ever want to sell it, we have the first right to purchase it. If you ever want to move it, we have the first right to purchase it. And again, totally informally, just over the phone, across my desk, whatever, they've agreed to those kinds of things. Now,
Okay.
there's a hell of a lot of distance between there and getting it down in writing.
Okay. The other one is, now, I guess I'm gonna need a brief explanation of an SID, but,
My favorite type.
I mean, I guess, and here's the point of this explanation.
Okay.
I mean, or the question, I think that multiple use is, in theory, a very good idea. We have 2 very different sorts of multiple use, and perhaps this linkage of ice skating rink and a private enterprise is, are we not talking about 2 different animals? That is, school kids go out and everybody goes out and skates. It is a true public facility. The other one, the ballpark, is a for-profit facility, and someone is making some money on it, which is fine, but I think we have 2 very different animals.
Okay, well, let me explain what I understand an SID is, and since we have the city clerk, Chuck Stearns here, who knows this stuff like the inside of his pocket. If I'm wrong, he'll tell me. And maybe that's the way to go. A special improvement district is the creation of a district, first of all right? And this district would be a citywide district, so every piece of property within the exterior boundaries of the city would be included in that district, okay? And then you create that district and you tax the property in that district for an improvement in that district. A special improvement district, okay? The improvement in this case would be the ballpark, all right? And you raise money from the property tax on the people in that district, okay? That's what a special improvement district is. The reason we started talking about a special improvement district is because you can potentially raise a pile of money with the special improvement district. I mean, if you add some property tax on every piece of property in Missoula, you can generate some real money. And you can also generate some real problems in terms of those property owners not wanting to pay additional tax. And so it may be the idea to broaden the base of that which you are asking them to pay for. So the person whose property is going to be taxed, who doesn't give a hoot about baseball, maybe cares about ice skating, maybe cares about horse racing, maybe cares about some other activity, so that you can do a citywide special improvement district and fold into that this idea of either a multi-purpose facility or the idea of an ice skating rink combined with a baseball park, or maybe the idea of a new baseball park, a new ice skating rink, some new improvements on our parks. In other words, do sort of a citywide park, SID, and get some money into the parks departments to do some improvements on some unimproved land. You know, this is a way that you could do something like that. None of those ideas are set in stone. The SID is another way of raising public money based upon public debt, with payment of that debt by the taxpayer. How'd they do?
Excuse me, I have couple other
Okay.
aspects of it.
This will really get complicated now.
My name's Chuck Stearns, I'm the city finance director. Other aspects of a special improvement district that are attractive and nice is it's treated as a different kind of city debt. So it's, when we look at issuing bonds and selling those bonds, it's looked at differently than our fire equipment and city hall bonds. And the fire equipment and city hall bonds, the fact that we just issued those a year and a half ago, doesn't really crowd out or affect, or they don't look at that we're using too much debt, because it's a special debt above and beyond any debt capacity or debt limit that we have. We're limited by Montana law, but we're only using about 1/3 of that limit, or even less than that. But still, Montana does not issue a lot of debt. Another main advantage is that you lower the burden on each property, as opposed to our bond for the city hall and fire equipment, because it's on all property regardless of whether that property is taxable or tax exempt. So on a special improvement district bond, all city parks are assessed and the city pays for that. University of Montana is a property owner that would be assessed, a large property owner. St. Patrick Hospital, Community Hospital, all the tax exempt properties pay their fair share on a special improvement district. But if you do a voted general obligation bond, only property taxpayers pay. So you're lessening the burden on everyone by spreading the base over which you're levying those assessments. Another reason it's an advantage, Billings used it successfully, and they have a good formula that it worked. They were able to combine it with federal grants. Another is you avoid a vote. Votes can be good, votes can be bad. We've looked at it, and nationwide baseball ballpark votes tend to fail. It passed in Denver. It doesn't say they always fail, they don't always pass, but it passed in Denver. It could well pass up here. We think it has a better chance any vote of passing if it's multiple use facility. It does have an ability for a 50% protest. 50% of the property owners in the city signed a petition protesting it, they can prevent it.
That's the idea of the vote.
Well, I mean, it's not exactly a vote, but it could be prevented. So, like our fire bonds and city hall bonds, we had to go on a specific city election and put it on the ballot. And then 50% or more support it, and it passes. On a special improvement district, you say, we're going to do this, and for a certain period of time, if 50% of the people in the city sign a petition protesting it, they can prevent it. And you can do both. I think the attractive things about an SID are that it spreads the burden out over a broader base, and it doesn't affect the city's ability to issue other debt, and other debt that we've issued doesn't affect the ability to issue these. I'd say the spreading of the burden is kind of key that we've looked at.
On a $3 million citywide SID, on a $50,000 piece of property, the increase in taxes would be $10.63 per year. And on a $100,000 piece of property, the increase would be $21.26 per year for 20 years.
Sort of costs, let's say this ballpark is built, however it's funded, and one of these two owners brings a franchise over. It's 1993 and they're playing ball. what sort of obligations or what have other cities found? Are there other costs, are there hidden costs, or is that all borne by the owner or the franchise owner, whether it's the city or not? What's our
Downside
running
risk,
costs? Yeah.
that's all subject to negotiation, okay? You negotiate a lease with the owner of the franchise. They come in and they can, and that's, again, they could pay you a portion of the gate receipts. They could pay you a percentage. They could pay you 50 cents out of every ticket sold. You know, it's all subject to negotiation. Do they pay for field maintenance, or do we pay for field maintenance? I mean, there's nothing graven in stone. We don't have any obligation unless we specifically and intentionally and hopefully knowingly contract ourselves into it.
But the community-owned franchises that are doing well in Montana are paying for themselves and paying for the upkeep of their facilities, and that's it. They're not making any money, but they are doing those things, and they're plowing every bit of quote-unquote profit back into their park to keep them up. Am I right?
Yeah.
The board of directors don't take any money out of it. They put it all back in.
The estimates that I heard were about $75,000 a year to operate the ball club. Now, you have to remember that the owner doesn't pay the salaries. That's the Major League Ball Club that pays the salaries. He doesn't pay for the uniforms. They're provided. Most of the fundamental equipment, that's provided. But his operational expenses, meal costs, transportation costs, this kind of thing, comes up to about $75,000 a year is what they've been figuring. That's what Ray Klesch told me out of Great Falls. That's what Renee Bosford told me out of Helena, so I figured, okay. They've also told me that we can expect a substantial infusion because of the ball clubs in here. And they've indicated that there's no specific way to compute this, but if you take the multiplier, you know, each dollar in a community goes around and around and around so many times. They estimate about $1 million gets dumped into a community when you consider the salaries that are paid. You know, you're gonna have like 30 people in town for a couple, 3 months that you didn't have before. Some of those kids are bonus babies that they, you know, the parent club pop for $200,000 for them. They're going to buy cars. They're going to buy stereos. They have to live here. You've got insurance that has to be purchased for them. You've got medical expenses that have to be borne. You've got transportation costs. You've got teams that come into Missoula that have to live here for overnight, you know, have to restaurant here, that kind of thing. So, you know, you're going to have that kind of an economic benefit, roughly, and your downside risk is all negotiable. Are there any other questions, any other comments? We do appreciate you coming out, especially this evening with everything that's going on. Again, if you're interested in participating, if you just want to be involved generally, talk to John. If you want to be involved in any specific committee, talk to Carl with the finance, talk to Ike with the site selection, and me on franchise. We'll make sure that we get your name and phone number and everything and get you on the list so that we can advise you of future meetings. Again, we have another public meeting scheduled here, 2 weeks, same time. And we appreciate you coming out then and bringing anybody else or telling anybody else about it. And thank you very much.